It's Super Videos back at you for another video. In this video I'm going to be talking about whether Dwight and Negan are going to help reinvent Daryl's character. So it seems like Daryl's character has become kind of stale, at least before season 6. And they didn't really know what to do with his character because he didn't exist in the comic book. And there was really no major storyline that they could give him. And the storylines they did give him were kind of like snippets of little arcs that were for other characters in the comic book. And basically what they did was give it to Daryl. For instance, this scene where Rick tells Daryl that you're my brother and there's that really emotional moment between them, that doesn't actually happen in the comic book. Of course, because Daryl doesn't exist in the comic book. But that is actually Abraham in the comic book who has that interaction with Rick, and Abraham and Rick basically bond in that scene in the comic book. What they actually did in the TV show is give that to Daryl, and there's some other parts as well where this actually happens. And it seems like Daryl doesn't have any sort of standalone story arc, or at least a small story for him. The only one I can think of before season 6 is Daryl and Merle's story, and how one was on the good side and one was on the bad side and then switched or whatever. And seeing the emotional moment when Daryl finds Merle and all of that crazy scenes that were, I would say, standalone for Daryl. But that's the only thing I can think of for Daryl. Now, that's before season 6, but when season 6 started, and specifically when Daryl encountered Dwight for the very first time, we kind of saw something very interesting with Daryl's character. And it's something that I'm very interested to explore more on. Because, of course, at that point, we didn't know that the character Daryl encountered was actually Dwight and he's with the Saviors or whatever. But what we did see straight away was kind of like a rivalry building between these two characters. And they actually built on top of that towards the end of season 6, and they're going to explore more of that in season 7, and more specifically in episode 3 of season 7, which we're going to see in a couple hours. So the thing is, I think Dwight and Negan are going to reinvent Daryl's character and make his character interesting again. Not that it wasn't interesting before, but it was becoming a bit stale, and it seemed like there wasn't anything particularly interesting for Daryl himself, just a standalone story for Daryl. But it seems like with Negan and Dwight's introduction and their interaction with Daryl, I'm very interested to see what's going to happen in the next episode with Daryl, because we know it's a Daryl-centric episode and they're going to focus a lot on Daryl. Dwight and Negan as well, but mostly Daryl. And I'm interested to see if they're going to torture him or whatever, and what they're going to do to him at the sanctuary, Dwight and Negan, and how that's going to change Daryl's character. And I'm assuming we're going to see a bit of change in Daryl, and we're going to see a darker side of Daryl. And of course, he has the guilt of Glenn's death at the back of his mind, which is going to spill over to what the Saviors and Dwight and Negan are going to do to Daryl, which is going to be very interesting to see. And that brings up a very good question, whether they're ever going to kill Daryl off. Because, again, he doesn't exist in the comic book, so they don't have any kind of limitation or guidance on where to take his character. So, are the writers ever going to kill off his character? And in my opinion, if they haven't killed him up until this point, then they probably have a very unique storyline for him, which is going to be with the Saviors and Dwight and Negan. They probably are going to do something with his character in season 8 and give him a big epic death in season 8. And it's going to be very much coupled with the story from the comic book that we're going to see in season 8, which is basically Rick and the other survivors fighting back against the Saviors and Negan. That's what I think is going to happen. I think if they're going to kill him off, they're going to do it in season 8. So for season 7, I think Daryl is very safe. There's also another kind of interesting dynamic that I see going on. Because in the comic book, there are 3 characters who comic fans knew were mostly safe, at least by this point in the story arc. and those characters were Rick, Michonne, and Andrea. Of course, in the TV show, Andrea's dead and Michonne has taken over her character. But what I feel is going on is Daryl is taking Michonne's role as well. So 3 characters that are going to be very safe in the TV show for a little bit are Rick, Michonne, and Daryl. I'm mainly talking about Season 7 at this point. In Season 8, like I said, things may change. Particularly for Daryl, not for Rick and Michonne. I think they're going to be safe for a long time. But for Daryl himself, Season 7 is basically a safe moment for him. He's going to be safe. But I'm very interested to see where they take his character, and I'm hoping they explore more of Daryl's dark side as well, because up until this point, we've kind of seen him either being the smartass or kind of changing after Merle's death to kind of like a quiet person. But I want to see other characteristics of Daryl, have them explore kind of like his darker side. Not for him to turn into a villain or anything like that, but just to see where he goes and the path he takes, where he is willing to go because of the things that have been done to him. Just overall, I think we are seeing a more interesting Daryl storyline coming up. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I'll be back for another video.